So we're gonna ramp. What are we gonna ramp into? Of course, Eldrazi. We're gonna play all of the big baddies that are out there. They're gonna be 8, 10 until 13 mana, and we're gonna play all of them. Using our ramp, we will be able to play them. They give us removal, card draw, maybe even ramp. All of those Eldrazi only have a trigger whenever you cast a spell, so you probably have seen those cards in other decks as well, but they will probably not use the cast trigger. In this deck, you'll see all of the cast triggers happen. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Tipsy Goat. Today, a DeckTech, one you will all know. She's been there for a long time and she just got reprinted as we discovered Innistrad Remastered. It is the biggest guild out there. It is Emrakul, the Promised End. It is a 13 mana creature, 13/13, that says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard. When you cast the spell, you gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn. After that turn, the player takes an extra turn. It also has flying, trample, and protection from instants. So basically it has hexproof, because there are few sorceries that will kill this thing. You see, Magic has a color pie, and every color has its strengths and its weaknesses. And Colorless, if you just print really good ramp, it's gonna go in all the colors. Same for removal, same for card draw. So Colorless isn't really good in those fundamental things, but that doesn't have to stop us. As you'll see, Colorless is really good at ramping. So when playing Colorless, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get a lot of ramp on the board. We're gonna have some protection. We're gonna have card draw, so we make sure we hit our land drops, but we're not gonna be the biggest control elements. Just leave that to the other guys at the table. So that's what you see here. We have 16 pieces of card advantage. We have a lot of damage. Of course, we're playing Eldrazi's. We have just a normal amount of lands. We have 16 ramp cards. Then we also have ramp harder cards. So it needs to sacrifice anything, or it just makes science. All of those things. So 26 pieces of ramp. We had 8 pieces of removal, but that's actually more than it seems, because there's Kozilek, there's Ulamog, there's Ulamog. They do all remove, but those are very, very expensive. Also Breaker of Armies. So we only have a 4 mana and a 1 mana card that will straight up remove things. Then we have some ways to get cards back from the graveyard. So we have a few board wipes. Of course, everyone knows Oblivion Stone. We can destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it, so we can take a few turns to protect our own stuff, or just straight up remove the board. Then probably the best Eldrazi card there is, Always Dust. Each player sacrifices all colored permanents he or she controls, so we're not gonna have any colored permanents, so we don't have to sacrifice anything, and all the players do. Also do keep in mind that Tribal is in fact a card type. So playing a Tribal sorcery means you have 2 card types in your graveyard for Emrakul. And then of course we have Ugin. It comes in with 7 loyalty counters, meaning we can minus X for 7 to exile each permanent with converted mana cost 7 or less. That's 1 or more colors. So basically board wiping everything with a color. As you'll see, Colorless doesn't have a way to just draw a card. So we have symmetrical draws in Temple Bell, Howling Mine, and Scrawling Crawler. Then we have a Palantir that can also mill. That says at the beginning of your end step, put an influence counter on Palantir, scry 2. The target opponent may have you draw a card. If the player doesn't, you mill X card, where X is the number of influence counter on Palantir. And the player loses life equal to the total mana value of those cards. There's a lot of high-powered cards in there, so if they just let you mill, then you get to Emrakul faster. If they don't, you can draw a card. Mystic Forge lets you play with the top. Of course, the One Ring, maybe if its power is too great, you can get it out, but for now, we're just gonna get the best deck out there, because Colorless already has its own disadvantages. Ugin's Mastery says whenever you cast a colorless creature spell, manifest the top card of your library. So you put it onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature. And you can turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card. Whenever you attack with creatures with total power 6 or greater, you may turn a face down creature you control face up. We can flip a Eldrazi if we're lucky. If not, we're just gonna get some 2/2s that maybe we can sacrifice to get mana. Mind's Eye is about the only card that directly gives card advantage. Wandering Archaic. Whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, they may pay 2. If they don't, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. And the backside is just each player looks at the top 5 cards of their library, reveals a land card and or an instant or sorcery from among them, puts the card they revealed this way into their hand, and the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. Each player gains 3 life, so it's a bit of card advantage and ramp as well. Then we have Zulodok, making our colorless spells. Have Cascade. We have Kozilek, that gives us card advantage and also pumps up our creatures. We have Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, that just lets us draw 4 cards. And the other Kozilek, when we cast it, if we have fewer cards than 7 in hand, we draw cards equal to the difference. We have a lot of ramp spells. You're probably gonna be down a lot of cards, so this might just draw us 4 cards as well. Alright, so how are we gonna get there? Of course, we have Chalice. For 2 mana, for 2 mana it can just tap for 1. For 4 it can tap for 2, etc. Soul Talisman, so it's a Soul Ring, but we need to wait a couple of turns, which we don't mind if we draw it early. Expedition Map, we can sacrifice it, so we can have an artifact in the graveyard, and we can also tutor up a land, and you'll see those are quite handy in this deck as well. Mana Vault, you might dislike this card because of its power, but I think, well, yeah, just do it. Soul Ring, Mannequin, it is an artifact creature, so if it gets destroyed, you'll have 2 types in your graveyard. Millikin lets you mill a little. Flash Raker is about the best ramp card in this deck, because whenever you cast a colorless spell, you create a sign, and whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it might get removed because of the burn, but we just played for the ramp. The Unworn Shaku lets you play multiple spells in 1 turn if you can cast some legendary permanents. The Celeste, this one is quite interesting. If it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as the Celestis enters the battlefield. It can tap for 1, and it can also change the time of day, so you can draw a card. Because whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you gain 1 life, and then you get to loot. So you draw a card, and if you do, discard a card. Versus Incubator lets us choose Eldrazi, so Eldrazi costs 2 less to cast. Worn Power Stone is just a really bad Soul Ring, but we need all the mana we can get. Brand Dynamo is great, and Clark Iron, and KCI lets us sacrifice all our artifacts. So if we play multiple mana dorks or mana rocks and we need to go all out, we can just sacrifice them all, have a lot of mana. Then we have a couple of what I would call ramp harder cards. Those need something else or just cost a lot of mana. Ashnod's Altar, Eldrazi Confluence. Eldrazi Confluence says choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. The first mode says target creature gets +3, -3, so you can remove a creature. The second mode says just blink target non-land permanent. And the third mode says create a Scion, so we can just make 3 Scions. Blinkmoth Urn says at the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, if this is untapped, that player adds colorless to his or her mana pool for each artifact he or she controls. So your opponents are probably gonna make a lot of mana as well, but we do play just a heck of a lot artifact cards, 37 to be exact. Forsaken Monument is really, really nice. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless, you add a colorless. So not just our land, but also all these ones are gonna give us a lot of mana. Geode Golem is the only way to cheat out our commander whenever it deals combat damage. Horizon Stone says if you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes colorless instead. So this one lets you save up a lot of mana and use on later turns. Conduit of Ruin says when it ETBs, says when you cast it, you may search your library for a colorless creature card with mana cost 7 or greater, review it, then put that card on top of your library, and the first creature spell you cast costs 2 less to cast each turn. Then Sower says when you cast a spell, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of their library. You may put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. Chromatic Ori just taps for 5 mana. Well, it costs 7 mana, but we will definitely use this mana. Spawn Dead Protector says at the beginning of your end step, return up to 1 tower Eldrazi card from your graveyard to your hand and create 2 signs. So the recursion is probably better, but we also make 2 signs, and we just need Eldrazi's as well. Now that we've made all this mana, what are we gonna spend it on? You will see all the baddies the Eldrazi can make. We have Mimic. Well, this is not the biggest, but it can become a copy of another Eldrazi. Soul of New Phyrexia. This is just a 6/6, and for 5 mana it can give all your permanents indestructible until end of turn. Protector we've seen. Breaker of Armies is a 10/8 that says all creatures able to block Breaker of Armies do so. We do have a couple of haste cards out there, so we can just play this, give it haste, attack, and remove all the creatures that we want to remove. Artisan of Kozilek says when you cast a spell, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Also has Annihilator too. Kozilek, as we've seen, gives card advantage. Void Winner is the most annoying Eldrazi we have, because it says your opponents can't cast spells even converted mana cost, and they cannot block with even converted mana cost creatures. Kozilek draws cards, Kozilek draws cards. Ulamog lets us exile 2 target permanents. It also has indestructible, and whenever it attacks, the defending player exiles the top 20 cards of his or her library. Then another Ulamog says when you cast a spell, target opponent exiles half their library. Round it up. It also has a ward, sacrifice 2 permanents. And it ends the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it, equal to the greatest mana value among cards in exile. And it has Annihilator X, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it. So you exile something with mana value 7, you now have Annihilator 7. Then the last Ulamog, the Infinite Gyre, that just straight up destroys target permanent, has Annihilator 4 and indestructible. And it does have the drawback of shoveling your graveyard back into your library. Emrakul, when you cast a spell, gain control of all creatures target player controls. It also has flying, protection from spells and from permanents that were cast this turn. And when it leaves the battlefield, you sacrifice all creatures. So you gain control of someone's creatures, and when it dies, you sacrifice all those creatures. So basically like a one-sided board wipe. And then we have It That Betrays. It has Annihilator 2. And a lot of the other Eldrazi have Annihilator as well. So we can take over their permanents, because this card says whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, put that card onto the battlefield under your control. So then we have Crashing Drawbridge to give haste, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots as well. And of course, in every tribal deck goes Roaming Throne, but since we have a 13 mana commander that has only a cast trigger, this one is even more important. Echoes of Eternity lets you copy abilities of a colorless spell, and it also lets you cast. Echoes of Eternity lets you copy the triggered ability of a colorless spell, but it also makes a copy. So we now have 2 Emrakuls, one will die, but we get to control 2 turns of our opponents. We basically only have 1 finisher. Of course we have some steal effects that might be called finishers as well, and Void Winnower can get there as well, but this one is a straight up finisher. Target creature you control gains protection from each color until end of turn, but it also has Overload for 5, so all of your creatures gain protection from each color, so they can only be blocked by colorless. Most people will not run a lot of colorless creatures, so they just cannot be blocked this turn. As promised, there are a lot of interesting lands as well. Some tap for multiple manas, like the Ancient Tomb, like the City of Shadow, that's like this City of Shadow that has the ability to sacrifice one of your creatures, but remove it from the game. So basically exile and put a counter on City of Shadows. Then on a later turn you can tap it to add X colorless mana to your mana pool, or X the number of counters on City of Shadows. So if you spend 2 turns sacrificing 2 creatures, then your next turns you can use it to tap for 2 mana. City of Trader just taps for 2, but if you play another land you have to sacrifice it. Crystal Vein, basically the same. You can sacrifice it and tap it to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Eldrazi Temple taps for 2, but you can spend this mana only to cast colorless Eldrazi spells or activate abilities of colorless Eldrazi. Eye of Ugin reduces our colorless Eldrazi spell by 2. Then we have a bounce land. We have we have a land that lets us store mana, so we can put a storage counter on Mage Ring Network by tapping it and paying 1, and then on a later turn we can remove our counters and add X mana to our mana pool. Mirrored Landscape is kind of ramp. Temple of the False God can tap for 2, but only if you control 5 or more lands. We do have 16 pieces of card advantage, so we are quite sure to be. We do have 16 pieces of card advantage, so we are quite sure to hit our 5th land drop. The Rain Generator lets you put a basic land card from your hand into play tapped if you have enough card advantage. Vespian Stage can become a copy of target land, so if we have a Crystal Fane, if we have a City of Traders, Ancient Tomb, this one gets to tap for 2 as well. Hugin's Labyrinth. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile a Colorless card with mana value 7 or greater from your hand, then it taps for 2. This one just taps for 2, but you can only spend it to play legendary spells. Then we have Urza's Mine, Power Plant, and Tower. If we control those 3, they all tap for 2 colorless mana. Urza's Saga, it taps for a colorless, but on our 3rd turn, you can also tutor up a Sol Ring, put it onto the battlefield. So this will basically ramp as well. And then we have the Workshop that can tap for colorless for each Urza's land you control, but you can only activate it if you control 3 or more artifacts. As said, we play a lot of artifacts, so this will not be a problem. And our basic lands, of course, wastes. We do have quite some interesting recursion spells. Geward's Hourglass Pendant. It has Flash. If a player will begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. That doesn't really matter, but for 4 and tap it and exile it, we can return to the battlefield, tapped all artifact, creature, enchantment, and land cards in your graveyard that we'll put there from the battlefield to start. So if we lose all our creatures, we pay 1, then we pay another 4, so we can basically for 5 mana protect our entire board. Yggdrasil, I think, is the funniest recursion piece that we have in here. When it's the battlefield, exile all creature cards from your graveyard. You can tap it to exile the top 3 cards of our library, and we can pay 4 and tap it to put a creature card exiled with Yggdrasil onto the battlefield under your control. It gains haste, and I would expect that you will have to sacrifice it at the end of the turn as well, but you don't. So if you have a couple of Eldrazi's in your bin, you just pay 4 every turn and you get 1 back. Desecrate Reality. For each opponent, I can exile up to 1 target permanent that player controls with an even mana value. And if at least 3 colorless mana was spent to cast a spell, return a permanent card with an odd mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield. So one thing I didn't really mention in this deck, how are we gonna abuse taking an opponent's next turn? It really depends on the board state and how your opponents played. If the board was just wiped, no one has cards in hand, obviously it's not that good, but most of the time you will get it out on turn 6, 7, and there's gonna be a few people ahead in board state, so you can make really favorable swings. There are gonna be people with a lot of cards in hand, so you can really make them lose all these cards. There's a lot you can do, and really do not understate how valuable this effect is. Another thing to mention is that this deck is really built around the theme and not really the commander. As you may have noticed, there were only 2 enabler pieces, so you could just put in maybe Suladog or Kozilek the Broken Reality as your commander, and not much will happen, except maybe the way you will play with the cards in hand. Deck building wise, it stays exactly the same. You can just switch out one for the other and switch up your gameplay. So I'm really wondering if you already have a colorless Eldrazi commander deck. If not, what's keeping you back? And I hope I made sure that there's nothing keeping you back. So for now, I would like to thank you and see you on the next one. Meh.